Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our first Environmental Justice Rulemaking meeting. I am Olivia Glenn, the Deputy Commissioner of Environmental Justice and Equity at the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection. We are convened this evening for one reason. After more than a decade of effort, New Jersey passed the nation's first environmental justice law on September 18th. The law does not go into effect until we adopt rules, and tonight's meeting is the launching of that process. Tonight, we will provide big picture framing, an overview and understanding of environmental justice and its importance, discuss the key aspects of the legislation, and then we will solicit public input and feedback in key aspects of the bill in anticipation of rulemaking. Please note that this is only the first step in many steps in our rulemaking process, so there will be other opportunities to provide input as the process moves forward. And before we convene, before we separate this evening, we'll share some of those other ways you can be involved. And I am delighted to engage in this public information meeting tonight, joined by one of my most esteemed colleagues, Sean Moriarty, who is the Chief Advisor of Regulatory Affairs here at DEP. Thanks for joining me, Sean.
Thank you, Deputy Commissioner Olivia. Glenn, I'm thrilled to be part of this initiative and to be working with you, Commissioner McCabe, Deputy Commissioner LaTourette, and our team at DEP, and all of the folks here today to bring the Environmental Justice Bill to life. While we're all currently inhabiting this world of COVID, and I'm speaking to folks from my basement, I am choosing tonight to picture a room full of people who are all committed to making New Jersey fairer, more just and equitable, and ultimately stronger, and who recognize that the Environmental Justice Bill and this rulemaking is a tool to further that cause. So let's get to it.
Thank you, Sean. And I'll say to all of you listening in, I always think it's a really good analogy to see Sean working in his basement. He is such an integral part of our department, and you can see the pipes that run through his house providing heat, and the foundation of his house there, that's pretty much his function for us at DEP. So I'm so glad to have him with us to help us advance this really vital process.
Thank you, Olivia. If I can live up to half of the nice things you say about me in these meetings, I will be doing well.
So Sean and I have introduced ourselves, and because we're in a virtual environment, you don't have the pleasure of seeing with ease the cross-section of participants in tonight's broadcast. We have individual interested citizens, environmental justice advocates, members of our DEP Environmental Justice Advisory Council, dedicated public servants from all levels of government, members of the business and industry community, mainstream environmental organizations, and social organizations such as the NAACP. Thank you all for being here to join us tonight and to weigh in on this really important process. So I'm going to walk through our agenda with you really briefly, and we'll get going. The first thing I'll cover momentarily are our rules of engagement. And then I'll spend a little bit of time framing environmental justice and talking about understanding environmental justice, just to kind of get us all on the same page. Then I'm going to hand the floor over to my colleague, Sean Moriarty, who will give an overview of the recently passed environmental justice law. And then we'll have time for facilitated public input. Following that, we'll talk about some of our next steps, and then we'll be weigh in from you, as well as us sharing some of the multiple ways we have set up that we'd like to engage with you moving forward. And then we'll share our contact information with one of the many ways we'll be able to keep in touch with each other. So next slide. So for the rules of engagement, like Olivia needed to do, turn off my cell phone. And for everyone else, we're going to ask that you remain on mute unless you are speaking. When you want to speak as part of the facilitated discussion, there is a raise hand function in your menu as an event attendee. If you just simply click on that hand, we will see that, and we're getting a cue of who is raising their hand behind the scenes with one of our event organizers, and they're going to give us your names, and we'll call in that respective order to respond to questions. We're going to ask, as we know everyone will, to just treat everyone with respect. And we're going to ask everyone to just limit their comments and questions on the topic being discussed, because the topic of discussion that we have for tonight is just really tremendous all in itself. And we really want to make the most of this time we have together. I'm going to ask that everyone limits their comments to 2 minutes, and I will physically raise my hand like this as you approach 90 seconds. And please note, we want everyone to know that this meeting is being recorded, and we will post this meeting on the DEP website after the session concludes. And so with that, we are ready to begin. I'm going to start with framing environmental justice. According to the EPA, environmental justice is the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of race, color, national origin, or income, with respect to the development, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws, regulations, and policies. Fair treatment specifically, and this is from EPA's definition, means that no group of people, including a racial, ethnic, or socioeconomic group, should bear a disproportionate share of the negative environmental consequences resulting from industrial, municipal, and commercial operations, or the execution of federal, state, local, or tribal programs and policies. Meaningful involvement means that the public has an opportunity to participate in decisions about activities that may affect their environment and/or their health. The public contribution can influence the regulatory agency's decision. Community concerns will be considered in the decision-making process, and decision makers will seek out and facilitate the involvement of those potentially affected. In the next slide, when we're talking about understanding the legacy of environmental justice, there are a few bullets here that I want to hit. Since the civil rights movement of the 1960s, grassroots communities nationwide have documented disproportionate environmental burdens endured by poor communities and communities of color. These disparities were not only raised in urban centers, but also in rural communities, and New Jersey is no exception. From our industrialized urban centers to rural migrant farming communities, these concerns are present all throughout our state. Specifically, these communities and their studies have shown a disproportionate quantity of minority and poor communities host potentially toxic facilities, such as landfills, incinerators, and other waste disposal entities. And it's not simply a matter of just disproportionate exposure. It is also not balanced with the level of consumption in those impacted communities. A 2019 study published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences found a racial gap between those who cause air pollution and those who breathe it. Specifically, that study found that African Americans and Hispanics experience 56% and 63% respectively more air pollution than they produce through consumption. This is in comparison to whites who experience 17% less air pollution than they produce through consumption. These disparities are not only limited to air quality and facility siting. These disparities are also present in water infrastructure, flooding, and reflected in land use and policy planning decisions and climate change impacts. Environmental injustices didn't happen overnight through the one decision, one regulated facility, one administration, or any one level of government. It has been decades in the making, and it is systemic. And this effort is our effort to change some of that in New Jersey. For communities defining environmental justice, impacted communities have been raising concerns at the local level, as well as have convened nationally. This happened at the first and second National People of Color Environmental Leadership Summits in 1991 and 2002, respectively, where communities came together to define and adopt the principles of environmental justice at the first summit and the principles of working together at the second summit. Those two summits laid the groundwork for what followed as governmental response on both the federal and state levels. Impacted communities have been working for decades to shape the agenda, make the issues clear, and engage other entities like government to ensure that environmental justice is realized. So like the federal government, New Jersey and other states have taken steps over the decades outside of legislation. In New Jersey, we launched our governmental environmental justice efforts during the Shin administration with an environmental equity task force in 1998. Our state issued its first environmental justice executive order in 2004 under Governor McGreevey. And then Governor Corzine followed and did the same during his administration. During the Christie administration, Commissioner Martin established an environmental justice administrative order, and Governor Murphy, in his first 100 days in office, passed an environmental justice executive order whose implications we'll discuss at another time. While these efforts have been admirable, no environmental justice community in the nation had statewide legislation that could preclude, mitigate, or remedy some of these environmental justice challenges. But here we are in New Jersey, something to celebrate. There is real opportunity within this rulemaking process. It's just important for us to remember and to just manage our expectations that the solutions to environmental justice are not one-dimensional, one permit, or one law. They require dialogue like this between environmental justice communities, government, regulated entities, and other organizations. And with that, I want to frame that some of what we seek to address will be incorporated into this rulemaking process. It is a tool and it is a process, and it will not be a one-size-fits-all solution for all of the disproportionalities that are experienced in communities. But it will be a very important tool to help us move forward together. This rulemaking process will require listening, it will require patience, and a very healthy respect for process and multiple perspectives as we craft the regulations, with all of us striving to do the right thing. And I think it's worth saying to members of our regulated community and businesses and industries that environmental justice communities support economic development. They just want it to be healthier, working toward a triple bottom line of social, environmental, and economic benefits. And I think it's also fair to say that there are model businesses and industries in our state who are doing the right thing, seeking to foster community engagement and to be good neighbors and really be connected into the communities and where they are. And what we need to do through this process is to elevate that kind of approach and understanding across the state as a part of a systemic way that we do business here. I want to take a scalpel approach. We're going to take a scalpel approach for the implementation of this legislation and this rulemaking. And we must use the framework of the law and refine it to clarify in implementation. That is the task before us. And now I'm going to place you in the hands of my capable and remarkable colleague who will facilitate the conversation from here. It's all yours.
Thank you, Olivia. I just want to open with saying that we're talking a bit at the beginning, and I'm going to try to get through my piece quickly because we do, as Olivia said, we have a pretty significant amount of time set aside to allow people to comment and to give us their ideas, and that's really what we're here for. So if I talk a little fast, I do apologize in advance, but I'm going to try to get through this quickly so that we can get on to hearing from everyone. So S232, or as we tend to call it, the EJ bill, recognizes that because environmental standards are often formulated based on the effect pollution has upon general populations spread over wide geographic areas, existing environmental laws fail to fully consider the impacts that certain pollution generating facilities have on their local communities. It also recognizes that this failure has created pockets of high pollution across New Jersey, where many pollution generating facilities have become concentrated in predominant minority and low income communities that may lack the financial and political power to shape their local landscape and avoid disproportionate adverse impacts upon their local public health and environment. So now that we've gotten that part out of the way, let's talk about some of the specifics of the bill and particularly its scope. So to understand the bill, we really first have to understand how it applies. And I look at this as kind of a three-pronged approach to applicability. First, is the facility in question one of the 8 types of facilities listed in the bill? And that goes for major sources of air pollution, such as power plants and cogeneration facilities, incinerators, sewage treatment plants, transfer stations, recycling facilities, scrap metal facilities, landfills, and certain medical waste incinerators. Second, we have to ask whether the facility is seeking one of the subset of environmental permits, from solid waste and recycling permits to development permits, such as those provided under our wetlands rules, CAFRA, or flood hazard, water supply and pollution, air pollution, and pesticides. It's important to note here that the bill excludes authorizations or approvals necessary to perform remediation or minor modification of major air source permits that do not increase emissions. And the third and final piece is whether the facility is located, whether the facility is seeking to be located or proposed to be located in an overburdened community. And while the bill leaves it to the department to better define those first two steps, it does provide a pretty specific definition of what constitutes an overburdened community. As I'm sure most of you are aware, an overburdened community is defined as one of three things. Either it has at least 35% of households that qualify as low income, and that is defined in the bill as at below twice the poverty threshold as determined by the Census Bureau, or 40% of the households are minority, and those are residents that identify as minority or as members of a state recognized tribal community, or 40% of the households have limited English proficiency. And that's defined as lacking an adult that speaks English, quote unquote, very well, according to the United States Census Bureau. And a couple of key points here. First is the use of or. And what that does is when you look at those three categories, it creates the most expansive protections possible using those categories. The second is the use of the census block group. And that's really the most finite unit of neighborhood census data available. And I think it allows us to best identify the individuals most in need of the added protections of local, public, and environmental health that the bill provides. We believe that the combination of the broader category of individuals utilizing the or with the more focused consideration of the census block strikes the appropriate balance for the protection in this area. So how does the bill work? This is kind of a very basic outline of what we read in the statute as to what a process might look like. And I'll just run through it quickly so people can understand. Along with a permit application for one of the covered facilities, and if it's an ineffective block group, an applicant would complete an environmental justice impact statement that identifies existing public health and environmental stressors in the community. We'll talk more about what an environmental justice impact statement should look like, and you'll be given an opportunity to inform us on that subject. Second, subject to criteria that will be developed with the input of our stakeholders, including the conversation today, DEP will assess whether pollution from the facility would create a disproportionate impact on the local community by imposing additional stressors. Then the department would assess whether, through adding appropriate pollution controls that address these localized impacts, the facility can avoid imposing a disproportionate public health or environmental impact. Where there is no disproportionate impact or pollution controls would resolve such an impact, DEP would issue the requested permit. Where there is a disproportionate impact and those controls cannot resolve it, then the department is required to deny the permit. However, even where there is some disproportionate impact, the bill requires DEP to consider whether the application should still be granted where the project serves a compelling public interest. Again, we've set aside some time to talk about what that actually means as far as defining a compelling public interest. Let's talk about a few things that the bill doesn't do. First, it doesn't require an absolute denial of environmental permits for new facilities. I think we've covered that a little bit already. It also does not allow the department to deny facility expansions or permit renewals. There is language in the bill that specifically states that we can only put conditional conditions on those permits. Third, it requires an analysis of localized public health and environmental impacts and analysis of additional controls that can be put in place to reduce localized pollution, as I said earlier. And lastly, it's not effective until the adoption of these regulations. So while we are setting an aggressive schedule here, the requirements of the bill are not yet in place. Let me go to the next slide. And last, before we get into our facilitated discussion, I just want to talk about the guiding principles that we abide by and have been articulated by Commissioner McCabe. First, we'll follow the law. We'll look at the guideposts set forth in the bill and some of those that I've already talked about, some that we'll talk about more as we move forward. Second, we'll follow the science. This process will be data-driven. We will aim to create methods and quantify impacts in a way that allows us to create an objective and defensible process. And that any data we use will need to be and will be reliable. And third, we need to find balance. And to do that, we need to consider perspectives of those impacted by the bill. And I underline and use the word perspectives because I don't like to use sides in this situation. Environmental justice is a moral issue. There are not sides. There are different perspectives and different things to take into account, but this is not a situation where we're taking sides. Let's talk a little bit about what our stakeholder process will look like, at least initially. We have our initial meeting to broadly discuss the topics and receive input. That's today. We really thank you for coming. And I cannot stress enough how valuable it is for your input in these situations and following this meeting. We are terribly excited to do this, but we recognize we can't do it without the information that the folks in this audience today will provide us. And the more information you provide us and the better you educate us on your perspective, the better we will be able to accomplish this rulemaking. Post this meeting, we will consider the input that we've received tonight, and we'll start to formulate some potential policy decisions. Once those decisions are made, once we've had a conversation with our commissioner and otherwise, we'll follow up with a series of smaller, more focused discussions with particular individuals and groups to present and discuss those policy decisions in more detail. You have a guarantee from the department, from your deputy commissioner down to your chief counsel, that you will not see a rule proposal without us talking to you again, and likely multiple times. If we're doing it right, you'll probably be sick of us by the end of this process. Now let's move on to the facilitated discussion part of our time. So what I'm going to do is we're going to go through some of the big concepts in the bill. We're going to lay out some things to consider, and then we're going to open up the floor for input. So first, we're going to start with the environmental justice impact statement. This is really the core of what we're trying to do here. This is the document that gets prepared by an applicant that is intended to identify environmental and public health stressors, and it is intended to make clear to the commissioner when making a permitting decision whether those stressors already borne by the overburdened community as a result of existing conditions will create a disproportionate impact. So let's go to the next slide. So this is our first question where we're going to start to take some input. Now, the next slide we have after this one, I'm going to leave on the screen for a little bit, and to the extent that it helps people to focus on what they might want to offer to us. But it'll just be an example of what an environmental impact statement does and what an environmental health impact statement does, just to see if that helps to spur any ideas. So the first question is fairly general. What should be included in an environmental justice impact statement to ensure the proper evaluation of the project and the analysis of existing local public health and environmental impacts and stressors? And Mandy, I'd ask you to just put the next slide up while we have this conversation. Thank you.
So for this portion, we're going to be monitoring your hands as they are raised, and I call on your name, and when I call your name, our behind the scenes organizer is going to take your phone off of mute from the organizer's main channel, but you have to unmute yourself. So just keep that in mind. And if there are some of you who joined us a little bit late, I see we're up to 202 attendees now. We have about 50 more people than when we started. We noted in the beginning that we are recording tonight's meeting. And so anything that is said will be recorded, and we're going to post this presentation on DEP website for everyone to see. So just remain aware of that. And again, I'm going to raise my hand like this if you've been speaking for 90 seconds, just to keep track of time. So we can begin with Ana Baptista. Ana, are you there? You are self-muted, Ana, so take yourself off of mute.
Hello.
Hi, Anna.
Hello,
Sorry.
we can hear you.
Yeah, it wasn't letting me unmute. I just had a question about whether the department will be using some of the environmental, if they already have a sort of list of environmental indicators from the previous EJ screen tool that was used internally, or if you have a preliminary list of environmental and health indicators you're thinking about using that you can share early on that you're working off of.
I don't think we have a complete, we don't have anything resembling a complete list. We do have some time set aside to talk about the environmental and public health stressors, which I think is going to be the next topic. And we'd be looking for input on that as we try to figure out what we're gonna use.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ana. Next is Ray Cantor, Be sure to mute yourself.
Oh, I am unmuted. Can you hear me?
We can. Good evening.
Sean, Olivia, thank you, and thank the commissioner for putting this together and taking stakeholder process seriously. We in the business community, by the way, I'm Ray Cantor with NJBIA, New Jersey Business Industry Association. So again, thank you for this and for taking stakeholder processes seriously. And I can assure you just from the get-go that I think the business community supports your goals, and what we all want at the end of the day is a workable process, and we look forward to working with you on that. Let me address the environmental justice impact statement, and it kind of gets to Anna's statement just before. As you're putting a list of stressors together, as you're asking for the regulated community to put this document together, I think it's very important that the department require only that data that is publicly available. There are lots of information that the public, the DEP obviously already has, and it was right. A lot of it's already put together, in your indicator, list, in prior tools. There's probably a lot of lists that the Department of Health has as well, but you should not be having applicants go out there and do their own research, their own type of analysis. This should all be publicly available data. You should point them to that and then let them compile it and put that document together. I'm not sure if this is this comment, or a later comment as well. But to our knowledge, once you have that information of all the stressors, that's 30 seconds left. Once you have all that information about all the stressors, to our knowledge, there's no way of analyzing that and making any scientific comparison. We're all aware of, I think, the California mapping tool. If you're moving in that direction, we'd like to have a conversation with you there. But just don't ask us to do the impossible. I'll wait for the next topic. I'm done. Thank you.
Thanks, Ray. You have my word. We're not going to ask anyone to do the impossible.
Thank you, Ray. Next, we're going to call on Nancy Griffith.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, just a couple of questions on what you want to include, or what will be included in the impact statement. One is a question of, will it just be specific environmental pollutants, or might it include, for example, the impact of trucks coming to the facility, so that, because they might be adding a significant amount of pollution. And second, I'm curious whether it seems possible that there might be combinations of pollutants whose combination would be worse than the sum of the pollutants. I think normally you regulate pollutants individually, and this is quite likely a topic for research, but we've got a couple of great research universities nearby. But the question is, for example, is a combination of ozone and PM2.5. Does the impact of ozone on the airways make the impact of PM2.5 much worse? So that seems like a question that we might want to ask. And obviously, the DEP would have to provide a way that someone applying for a permit would evaluate that. And considering Ray's question just now. Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Absolutely. I think I can offer a little bit on your first question. I mean, the bill does identify mobile sources of air pollution, and I think that truck traffic likely falls in that category, and we'll talk about that, in a little bit more detail as we move forward in this conversation. And thank you for the second comment.
Thank you. And now we'll call Chief Mann.
Hi, can you hear me now?
Yes,
Yes,
we
sir.
can.
Thank you. First of all, thank you, everyone, for being here today. I'm a big fan of environmental impact statements, and from the indigenous perspective, one of the things that's very important about having an environmental impact statement is that in the 3 indigenous communities that we have in the state of New Jersey, state recognized tribes, we still go into the woods and collect medicinal plants, collect wild edibles. We still, we still get our resources for survival from the environment. Specifically in northern New Jersey, we have those issues that are at hand. We have a pipeline, plant that they're looking to put in that sits above the water for rain, for Newark and the Wansea Reservoir. So the environmental impact statements are very, very much needed, and those need to be really fleshed out. Even to, sorry. Yeah, sorry about that. As coming from our perspective, I mean, there's a lot of human beings that come to northern New Jersey to hike and to be in the woods. They also would be out there collecting wild edibles and medicinal plants. So, environmental impact statement is very important, especially for indigenous people. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Man.
Thank you. Next, we will have Eric Stiles. We heard you briefly, but now we can't hear you anymore.
Okay, how about now? It keeps on going back to muted. Just reading about the environmental health impact has me thinking about the huge health benefits that accrue from providing access to nature, knowing a lot of our great cities have park deserts where kids and families don't have the opportunity to play in the outdoors, knowing in regards to both physical and mental health and academic performance. So to the extent that this legislation is able to include that in consideration, recognizing that's a huge step forward. My kids, we live in Bernardsville in the caretaker's cottage. They have the benefit of having access to nature where it is clean and welcoming. And we need to ensure that all communities, especially the communities as defined by this legislation, have that same fundamental human right. Again, stressing the both mental and physical health benefits. That's all I have to offer. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Eric.
Thank you so much, Eric. And so for this question, we're just going to take one more person's response, and then we're going to move to the next question. But do be mindful again that this presentation will be available online when the meeting is over. We will continue to collect your input, and we're also going to send out a survey that has all of these questions in it. So if you're not able to speak tonight, you will be able to submit it in writing to us so it can still all be a part of our decision-making process. So the final person who I'll call right now is Dr. Nikki Sheets.
Hi, Olivia. Hey, Sean, can you hear me?
We can.
So,
Thank you.
Hey, Olivia, you just answered the main question I was gonna ask. So we'll be able to provide you written comments. Will there be a deadline for that? And will there also be other stakeholder meetings on, devoted to devote specifically to certain questions? And I guess I just have to say, we, of course, the EJ community disagree with what Mr. Cantor said, that once you do establish the public health and environmental stressors, they can't be aggregated or analyzed. There are screening tools all over the country that have done that. And in fact, your own NACE cumulative impact screening tool did that. But my main question was one of process. Do you have a deadline for submitting those written comments, and the other stakeholder meetings like this where you're focused on one specific or a couple of specific questions or ideas?
I think a resounding yes to the second one. There will be much more conversation. I think we're trying to get, we're trying to collect initial information, and we'll be back to you once we have a chance to think about that and start to put a little bit more specificity to some of these issues. With regard to a deadline, I think we're going to ask for comments in about 30 days, but that's really because we want to move forward as quickly as we can on this, but I wouldn't call it a deadline. If you have information that comes up later and is relevant, we will accept it and consider it as part of the rulemaking for as long as we can, particularly at least until we propose when we're, kind of that record closes. But, we're open for discussion up until proposed. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Okay, now we're ready for the next question. Okay.
So this kind of is of a similar mold. The Environmental Justice Bill calls for a public hearing in connection with the preparation of an environmental justice impact statement. It calls for that public hearing to be held within the affected community. And we will need to design a process and put some requirements in place for how that hearing should be conducted. And we're interested in any input that folks might have about how we can ensure that hearing is meaningful and that there is meaningful participation. We do not want it to be a box that's checked off on an application list, and we don't want it to be held or conducted in a way that that limits or otherwise chills participation. So we're particularly interested in any feedback folks might have on that right now and moving forward.
Okay, the first person who we will hear from is Marcus Sibley with the NAACP. Marcus, did you want to speak at this point?
Oh, there it is. It just came up on mute. Perfect.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Again, my name is Marcus Sibley. I'm the chair of the NAACP New Jersey Environmental and Climate Justice Committee. We're very excited about this meeting. Some of the things that I wanted to speak about have already been addressed, but I guess my question would be on this particular question. Are there efforts being made between the DEP and organizations like the NAACP, like other even Greek-led organizations, like any groups throughout the state to help magnify the message so that when these permit when the information goes out for the hearings or for the permits that are coming out, are there any mechanisms in place to get the groups involved with sharing that information? That's just the question I have for this one. So thank you very much for the time, and I look forward to your answer.
Thank you, sir. Olivia?
Yes, I can give you a quick response to that question to let you know. In my role as Deputy Commissioner of Environmental Justice and Equity, I also oversee our Office of Diversity, Inclusion, and Outreach. And we are actively working right now to create just the kind of database that you are talking about. And I am delighted to let you know that we have a tremendous amount of resources already in place that have identified HBCUs and Black Greek organizations, Hispanic serving institutions, and many more. So what we're going to do as a step with that, because some of that we know we have people's consent to reach out to them. For others, we want to confirm we have their consent before we just start sending them a lot of emails. So we're going to work through one of our email platforms to reach out to those respective organizations and allow them to respond to us and say they consent to being contacted by us for processes like this. So yes, that effort is underway.
Thank you very much. And again, our committee is all in favor of helping to get that information out, because it's just far too often people don't know what's happening right in their own backyard. And it's really important for us to make the concerted effort to stop that. So thank you again.
Yeah, I think we would very much like to work. Thank you. Absolutely.
Next is Kim Gaddy, who wears many hats. Kim, be sure to tell everybody all the hats that you wear.
Okay, good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. I'll start off fourth generation Norther. I am the environmental justice organizer for Clean Water Action and the vice chair of NJDEP EJAC. And so I'm glad that this question that we have here, meaningful participation, I just want to make sure that, when you use that word, that it's authentic and that the communities that's most impacted definitely are contacted early on and a part of the process and the solution. And most importantly, that you have it during a time where residents can participate. As a employee for Clean Water Action, this is my job, right? So I have the time to participate in the morning, the afternoon, and whenever. But when you're talking about something so crucial as this, we have to make sure we're able to meet the residents where they are and also make the time accessible and available when individuals can participate. Then there's also the levels of communication. Not everybody has computers, not everybody has technology. So we just want to make sure that you all are mindful. And can you speak to some of those steps or measures that you will be taking to make sure that all the voices are lifted up in the communities that are most impacted? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Kim.
Thank you, Kim. Next, we're going to call on Nathalie Augusto Filion. I apologize if I did not pronounce your name correctly. Nathalie?
Hi, it's Natalie. Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Hi, I'm Chief Sustainability Officer for the City of Newark, and I have a response that sort of bridges this question with the one before. I noticed that in the list of bullets underneath the environmental and health impact statement process, the phrase health impact assessment was captured. And I wanted to call that out specifically because there's very dictated methodology from the National Association for City and County Health Officers, as well as the CDC, as to what an HIA, a health impact assessment, entails. And I think one way in which we can potentially address some of Kim's comments and others that have been said beforehand about genuine and authentic public engagement is that the scoping step of an HIA demands a very specific methodology for engaging impacted stakeholders. The other thing that I think is valuable about the HIA approach is that it allows an early determination about whether a rapid, intermediate, or comprehensive process for analyzing impacts will be used, which I think speaks to the fact that different projects have different time horizons. So I just wanted to offer that for a permit that would potentially be issued for, let's say, a decade or longer, that I would think a more comprehensive and thorough, and potentially even the use of data that is projecting, population growth, expansion, number of children in school facilities, et cetera, that could be captured in the process that's used. Thank you.
No, thank you.
Thank you. Next, we will hear from Ben Sirocco.
Can you hear me? Hi, thanks so much for your time. Thanks for setting this up. I'm excited to have the opportunity to speak. I live in Camden, New Jersey, and volunteer on a variety of environmental groups in the city and in our region, and work in public health in the city. One thing, and please don't take this as a criticism, but more of constructive criticism, I hope. Currently, to learn about new or renewed air permits, major air permits in our city, we learned from Mr. Danny Wong from the DEP that there was a specific email, I guess it was his email, to ask him to be put on a list to learn when new permits were coming up, which was great to find out this information, but your average member of the public will have no idea how to do that. I'm curious if a better publicized system will be created so that those living in environmental justice communities can learn when air permits are actually coming up for renewal, just so your everyday person can learn about that. I'll just reflect on what Mr. Sibley said earlier. People do not know what's going on in their backyard. Like currently, for example, there's like a company, Eastern Metal Recycling, a scrapyard that's being fined by the EPA for operating without an air permit. No one knows about this. You know, the What's in Your Backyard website is great. The 1-877 warn DEP phone number is great. But along with all of this, there needs to be an educational component to do outreach and to inform residents about what air permits are, like what is in their community, how can they actually learn about, this entire process. Thank you. I'll just add Spanish language. I know it's difficult, but there is live captioning software that you can use for these types of things. Spanish language is huge, so I'll just add that in, and other languages too. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know if you want to touch on the notice piece or not, but I think that's certainly something that the process here should address in some way, so that folks understand what's happening in their backyard, particularly if you are renewing, expanding, or new permits. I mean, I think that's really what we're trying to get at as part of this, and I think, as Olivia indicated earlier, that's one of the things that our office is trying to tackle, is how can we better inform folks of things that they might not have known that they needed to seek out information on. I think that is well said and well taken by us. And on the topic of language, we really, for the purposes of this meeting, we tried extremely hard. There were more people than we could accommodate on the technology that we have available at the moment that would have allowed us to translate. And we're going to do everything we can to provide this information in more than just English, so that it is accessible to other folks. Absolutely.
Yes, we actually have efforts underway already to have a session like this in Spanish. That's going to be one of our points of follow-up that we are going to do. And one of the members of our rulemaking team is bilingual. So we are very lucky in that regard, and we'll be utilizing many skills. I did also want to note that we do have a Department Environmental Justice Advisory Council that will also help us make sure that we're doing extensive outreach to engage our communities across the state. And they really drive and inform the work that we do. So with that, we're going to move on to the next question. And don't forget, if you had something you wanted to say here, we're going to send out all these questions in a survey. So you will have the opportunity to respond to everything that's presented tonight, even if you don't get to speak.
Absolutely. And thank you for bearing with us and moving on. I know more people have more things to say, and we do want to hear it, but I think we have some fairly meaty topics that we really do want to get into before our time ends tonight. So on the issue of environmental and public health stressors, which I think we've talked about a little bit, the bill defines environmental stressors to include those that are listed on the screen: concentrated areas of air pollution, mobile sources of air pollution, contaminated sites, transfer stations and other solid waste facilities, recycling facilities, scrap yards, and certain point sources of water pollution. Now, the department, as part of this rulemaking, will be working to define each of these terms, and we'll talk to you on more specifics on some of them. And we think some of them can be done with references to our existing rules, but that will be something that we'll save for another time. For the purpose of this discussion, we'd like to get some feedback on some of these areas that might not have an easy definition within our rules. So on to the next. Fantastic. So I think the first question is what should the department consider as concentrated areas of air pollution? How should they be measured? Is there anything that the department should exclude in this analysis? And similarly, same questions for mobile sources. And I think we can take input on those two, and then we'll get into the third question, which I think probably deserves its own time.
We will begin with Robert Lowenbach.
Hello, good evening. Yes, I'm Rob Lombach from the Rutgers School of Public Health. I didn't see these two questions before I raised my hand. My comments are really about public health stressors that include like the pre-existing prevalence of disease in communities. So conditions such as asthma, heart disease, or chronic diseases that increase susceptibility to air pollution. And I think they should be included as public health stressors, maybe beyond the scope of this question. But I think to sort of expand on that a little bit while I have the opportunity, if that's okay.
Yes, it's actually the next question. So you're just ahead of us. Please go ahead.
All right, thanks. So I think a challenge there is that this information on this, rates of asthma, heart disease, and so forth, is usually not available at the census tract level. But there are methods to do local area estimation, sort of using some of that information that's, incorporated into the overburdened community definition, like income and, a proportion of minority or people of color, that can be used to estimate rates of asthma, given other information too in regression type analysis. And that's actually been done by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation for a number of cities, including Newark. So I think there should be consideration of developing those sorts of methods to better get at what's happening locally, in addition to looking at vulnerable populations, like as was mentioned previously, schools, nursing homes, hospitals, that might be in the vicinity of a source. But just, in terms of looking even throughout the census tract or even a larger area, if there's reliable information available, or estimating that based on methods that are available, I think is really important to characterizing the impact on a community. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And next is Lauren Bailey.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Hi, I'm Lauren Bailey. I'm the Director of Climate Policy for Tri-State Transportation Campaign. Thank you so much for putting this together. And I don't want to dwell too much on mobile sources because I know that you've mentioned earlier this evening that mobile sources will be discussed in further detail in this conversation and moving forward with this process. So I just first off want to highly encourage a serious look at mobile sources and what our options are there, given that our emphasis is on transportation and transit in particular. We're very aware of the mobile nature of transportation, but the stationary emissions concerns for, in particular, I don't want to tread on anyone else's comments, but ports for medium and heavy duty vehicles, trucking and freight, but also places like bus depots for not only public transit, but charter buses and things like that, where we see high rates of idling and significant emissions that are often going to be in similar rates of pollution to other stationary type sources. I do also want to bring up the opportunity to consider a concentrated area of air pollution to be a highway and to be large areas of vehicular transportation. We do see that while highways are mobile sources, they are consistent sources of emissions for our communities. So I do want to submit that for consideration as well as part of the including but not limited to discussion as this moves forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lauren. Next is Jennifer Coffey.
Hello, can you hear me? Oh, great. You have to click that twice, it seems. I had my hand up for the previous question. I'll just be very brief because I know we've moved on and just say that New Jersey has about 380 established environmental commissions throughout the state. And these are volunteer members of their communities who are concerned about public health and the environment. And they are great networkers and a wonderful group to connect with in terms of getting out information on public hearings. And I also want to offer ANJAC services and our networking to host webinars, or someday when we can be in person again, maybe that to present to ECs, to clue them in to how they can become aware of these hearings, and then ask them to spread the word throughout their community, to network with their churches, their other religious centers, their scout groups, et cetera, et cetera. So we are very happy to support the EP's efforts in this, and just thank you for the opportunity to speak.
No, thank you. It was certainly worth hearing that comment, even though we passed the question. So thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you so much, Jen. And next we'll call on Cynthia Mellon.
Hi there. Can you hear
Hi.
me? Hi.
Yes.
I actually was responding to a much earlier question about communication. I am the chair of the Environmental Justice Committee of Latino Action Network of New Jersey, and we would be really happy to help with that outreach and also help make sure that there's Spanish language translation or a specific, publicize that there's going to be one in Spanish. So I'll be back later, but thank you very much.
Thank you, thank you, thank you for that. We will certainly reach out to you to be sure we're doing our absolute best on that. We really want to do our due diligence. And next is Danielle Waterfield.
Hi, thank you very much for having us this evening in this public forum. It has been very, very informative and I appreciate it. I'm with the Institute of Scrap Recycling Industries, and I wanted to address the question about what should the EP possibly exclude from the concentrated areas of air pollution. And there's a lot of data that goes into the benefits of recycling, and New Jersey has a lot of recycling legislation currently being considered in the legislature and is demonstrating a desire to encourage the use of recycled content and be a leader in the nation for recycling. And so we would very much like to work with the EP on how to look at the benefits of recycling entities and consider the benefits that they provide their communities and the cost benefit analysis there as you're considering what are stressors and perhaps weigh whether or not they actually are not stressors in your communities, given the benefits they provide.
Thank you. There was, at least on my end, there was a fairly high level of feedback on that, but I think we did understand your question. I think we'll want to talk to you more specifically on it.
Thank you, Danielle. Because we didn't hear some of that from the registration, I see you're connected to the Institute of Scrap Recyclers. Your feedback on that would be really valuable. So if you could follow up with the survey, that would be fantastic. And when everyone finishes speaking, can you mute yourself? Okay, next we will have Amy Goldsmith.
Hi, I'm Amy Goldsmith. I'm the New Jersey State Director for Clean Water Action, and I'm a steering committee member of the Coalition for Healthy Ports. And I want to circle back to other sources of pollution and stressors in looking at non-road sources like the ports itself, the warehouses, which are coming in closer and closer into our port adjacent neighborhoods, and the spaghetti loop of rail that circles our neighborhoods and often have idling diesel engines and switchers in the rail yards. And so I wanted to bring up those. And the other is that, is there going to be some kind of ranking of sources based on quantity and toxicity of emissions, and sort of and also the sense that, you know, there's the cumulative impact of multiple sources. So for example, in an incinerator, you put paper and plastic together, you get dioxin, right? So when you have things that are combining constantly, or you're getting exposed to diesel, then you're going to get exposed to something else. Are you going to be ranking and looking at those quantities and toxicities?
I think that's a perfect segue to that third question on the slide is how should we compare these stressors relative to each other, and are certain stressors more impactful to others? Maybe if we just flip back one slide for the purposes of this discussion, be a good opportunity for people to let us know, you know, from your perspective, are there things that we should be particularly concerned about versus some of these others that are identified in the legislation? And Amy, if you're still on and you want to,
well, I mean, there are clearly, you know, some communities have contaminated sites that are very localized in a soil where, you know, air pollution like Covanta, the ports, the trucks, you know, it's that combination that makes, you know, very problematic. And in speaking back to what Dr. Robert Lombach was speaking to is, you know, people have pre-existing conditions because of the exposure they already have. So adding more exposure of one thing or another or a new exposure can compound that. I'll add more in our comments. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Amy. Next, we'll have Dan Wiley.
Yes, hello. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
How you doing? My name is Daniel Wiley. I'm from Newark, New Jersey. I'm also in an environmental justice community, a community that's surrounded by the airport, railroad, incinerator, recycling centers, you name it, we got it. And I wonder if something that will be measured is the economic stressors in neighborhoods like mine. Being that, and for example, the last 2 days, it's been quite humid, but there's also been an awful stench in the neighborhood, which caused me to close my windows and put my air conditioner on. I think about families in our neighborhood who at this time probably look at the little bit of a buffer that they have to save some money because the windows can be open because the cooler weather is coming. But, you know, because we have to close windows and put air conditioners on, that's an added stress that comes in the form of a higher electricity bill. So I just wonder if that's something that would be covered as far as the stressors, the health stressors that it puts on the community. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dan. We're going to move on to the next question.
Okay, so this is kind of in a similar vein. This discusses the public health stressors identified in the bill. And so the bill defines public health stressors as conditions that may cause potential public health impacts in an overburdened community. I think this goes to some of what we've talked about already. The bill lists public health impacts that include but are not limited to asthma, cancer, elevated blood lead levels, cardiovascular disease, and developmental problems. So on the next slide, we have some questions that we'd like to receive feedback on this. So the use of the language may cause in the bill, we think gives us some flexibility to look beyond some things that might be difficult to assess on a census tract level or some census block level, like I believe an individual from Rutgers mentioned before that some of that data is difficult to assess. So it can allow us to use conditions that might impact some of these public health stressors, and some of those things that, you know, we've at least talked about preliminarily and wanted to offer as examples, non-exclusive examples, of course, are the age of the housing stock because of the potential for additional lead paint, presence of lead service lines, ambient air monitoring data, emergency room, emergency department visits, and I think some of the things that folks have mentioned already kind of fit within this category. But I think we're looking for input on how, you know, what we should consider as potential causes for these health impacts, how we should quantify or measure the impacts. Similar question to how they should be compared to one another, and any additional sources of data that folks have or would like to alert us to that we should be looking at as we make this assessment.
Okay, our participants are taking their time in this question, so I'm going to call two names that are a repeat. The first will be Eric Stiles, and the second will be Ana Baptista.
Lack of access to safe, accessible parks. Peer review literature is overwhelming. That has detrimental health impacts. Thank you.
Okay, next will be Ana Baptista.
I was just gonna add, you know, I don't think using ambient air monitoring data for public health indicators, stressors, is gonna work because I'm not sure how, you know, first of all, we don't have great ambient air monitoring data that's got good coverage in places like Newark. And I feel like we should be looking at also some of the public health risks. So like in the EPA EJ screen, they look at respiratory hazard risk. They look at cancer risk. So there are existing databases that calculate risk factors for some of these indicators of public health. Also, ER visits are problematic because a lot of EJ communities actually have limited access to hospitals, local hospitals, and have limited access to healthcare. So they're not visiting the ER if they can avoid it. So it's not usually a good marker for public health. I think we need to maybe talk to some of the folks at the Rutgers Yoshi Center and see what are the different ways we can take the data we do have about the prevalence of cardiovascular disease and the risk factors for things like asthma and cancer, and calculate them at a unit of scale that we could use in this for the public health stressors. I'll just stop there.
Thank you, Anna.
Thank you, Anna. Ray Cantor is next, followed by Maria Lopez Nunez.
Yes, thanks. I just want to I think this conversation has been very good. Everyone's raising excellent issues about stressors and cumulative impacts and areas where you may have multiple stressors there. And I'm going to reiterate my earlier point that while this is all excellent data to have, and the subject of, I would love to hear from the Rutgers professor how it all plays together. We're concerned that you're going to be making a requirement of an applicant to quantify or to analyze data and inputs that don't all go together, or there is no scientific methodology to do that. So while it's an excellent intellectual conversation, we worry about the practical, as an applicant comes in and has to file a permit application. I'm also somewhat confused. In the normal case of a DEP permit, there is a standard. If you're getting an air permit, they'll look at, how much additional pollutants of a certain type could you put into air without causing this effect. Same with water. Same with, any other type of discharge, or even in the land use world. I'm not sure what the analysis of the stressors ends up getting you. Are you looking for a number beyond which you cannot go beyond? And then how does that analysis relate to the end result, where you're turning permits down based on its comparison, to other areas of stressors? So I'm not sure how this all works together. Again, the analysis is good. If it leads to great research projects, fantastic. If we learn more, that's only going to help our, permitting in the future. But I'm not sure what the end result of this environmental justice analysis and stressor analysis is going to be, and how it relates to what the department ultimately does.
Thank you, Ray. I mean, when we're prepared to show you that analysis, we will. But we will have an analysis that we think will be objective and clear, and relies on data that is reliable, and we'll be able to show you how we're going to do it when we put it all together.
I would just ask then, if you know a direction you're going in, if you could let us know. Again, if you're looking at California, let us know so we could give you good advice or good critique, as opposed to at the end, here's what we're doing, and then it's too late.
No, fair request, and it will be iterative, absolutely.
Thank you. And Maria Lopez Nunez, you're next.
Hello, you can hear me?
Yes, we can.
So, hi, this is Maria. I live in the Ironbound, and first off, I want to be clear that this is going to require bravery on all of our parts. Hearing, I know that we have to all be involved as stakeholders in the process, but hearing Ray Cantor, I'll just be clear, I get a little nervous of industry has decided for so long and has had such an undue amount of influence over the processes. And that's how we ended up with the situation that this bill is trying to rectify. So when we're talking about balance and of course, DP is not here to take sides, but I do think that DP is here to balance the scales of justice that have historically hurt and harmed our communities. And then in terms of available data, you know, I would love actually more data on our community, and I hope that this is actually a challenge and kind of like raising the bar for DP of what data we need to make public, that we need to gather, so that it's not just what is already out there. I want to see DP, and I'm sure my community wants to see DP pushing the boundaries. Because, you know, even our air monitoring has just been so lacking in our communities, you know, like our direct, localized air pollutions. So those are just some things in terms of public health stressors. I do think that violations of industry needs to be considered as public health stressors, like how often are industries in our neighborhood violating their permit? Because that is already a standard, and that standard we find gets violated over and over and over and over again. So as an industry community, that should, you know, they should be held responsible for not violating their own permits. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria.
Thank you, Maria. Next, we will take Frank Brill.
Can you hear me now? Great. Okay. A quick question. I apologize because this question occurred to me after you had moved past the process, you know, slide. But I think it's a basic question, and a lot of people are going to have raise it at some point. It's great that you're going out and hitting a lot of affected communities and getting data and information and comments right now. And it sounds like you're going to move along and have more meetings of this sort. I'm wondering what it comes down to. Is this going to substitute for the traditional publication of proposed rules in the New Jersey Register, or is this going to come down, you're still going to use that vehicle? The rules that you're going to be proposing, will they end up in the New Jersey Register?
Yes, absolutely. We will be following the APA process to a T.
Fine. I wasn't quite sure how it was going. Thanks.
Okay, thank you all. We're going to move on to the next question.
So the bill requires the department to determine whether environmental and public health stressors, things that we've already talked about, are disproportionate to those borne by other communities within the state, county, or other geographic unit of analysis as determined by the department. So what we're looking for feedback on here is, what do we think, or what should we be considering as the appropriate geographic unit of comparison? So a couple of ideas, and again, non-exclusive. We could compare it to the county. We could compare it to the state. We could compare it to some region, and we can do that. We can do that analysis by excluding the overburdened community in question. We can do that analysis by excluding all of the overburdened communities within that geographic unit, or we could include those we could not exclude the overburdened communities. So I think what we'd like to hear from folks is whether there are opinions on what would be the appropriate way to approach this from a comparison perspective, and to the extent folks want to offer input on what it means for an impact to be disproportionate, whether there is a magnitude of difference between a state or county stressors, and what that might look like in a disproportionate impact analysis.
First, we'll hear from Kimmy Way. Kimmy, you're self-muted.
I have no idea how to unmute myself.
Oh, we can hear you. We can hear you now. Kimmy, we can hear you. Kimmy, are you there?
Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes, we can hear you.
I can't unmute either.
Kimmy, you're unmuted. Okay, we'll come back to Kimmy. And next we will go to Chief Mann.
Thank you. One of the things that I've noticed here in the last several maps of the state of New Jersey showing overburdened communities is that in Passaic County, there is no blue there to block out the Ringwood Mine Superfund site. So that's just one thing that I've noticed. And I would imagine that the appropriate geographic unit would be county or even down to town. As it relates to other communities, like the disproportionate birth that's borne by other communities. So our community in Ringwood, New Jersey, the Superfund site, is a community in which disproportionate stressors are delivered to communities downstate that are receiving water from the Waukee Reservoir. So it needs to be a little bit smaller than we have it where there actually could be another one there that says local. Yeah, that's it.
I actually want to respond to that. And I will tell you that we're aware that for some of our state recognized tribes, some of our indigenous communities, that definitely the initial scope of these does not fit every one of those communities. But I will tell you that is something we are going to refine in this rulemaking process. So no, you may not see it here within how it's defined in the law, but in the regulation, to make sure that we are not missing our state recognized tribes.
Yeah, thank you. But even outside of us, right, our community in Ringwood, the larger community of Ringwood is also, right, that thought. That's what I mean by also by having it, on a more local level, so that you can actually get down to what some of the earlier questions was about how to ensure that those communities, the smaller communities that are impacted disproportionately are recorded and can actually get the help that they need. Thank you.
Thank you for that very, very valid point. So next I'm going to call on Dr. Nikki Sheets.
Hi again, Sean and Olivia. So in answer, so this is just me talking, and of course, with my colleagues, we will be discussing this and submitting some comments to you. But on first impression, I would say that you should not include other overburdened communities in the comparison. And I'm keeping in mind that the definition in the legislation for overburden does not actually include a pollution burden indicator. But we know that these communities, low-income communities and communities of color, will certainly be correlated with higher pollution burdens in other communities. Your own cumulative impact screening tool actually shows that very, very nicely. So if you included other overburdened communities in that definition, you're almost defeating your purpose, because you're trying to lower the amount of pollution in those neighborhoods, and that would elevate your comparison too much. But also we'll submit we'll submit comments on that. And I just wanted to know, you said, what does it mean for the impact to be disproportionate? I think in the bill it actually says, will granting the permit result in cumulative public health and environmental stressors that are higher than in other communities? Now we can maybe that's semantic, but maybe it's not. That's something else to consider. I do think there is a distinction between higher and disproportionate.
That's fair. And as a lawyer, I'm all for semantics. I don't think that we can be too careful with our language. I do appreciate that, Dr. Sheets.
Thank you, Louis. Thank you, Sean.
Thank you, Nikki. Next, we will have Kim Gaddy, followed by Ben Sirocco.
Oh, Kim Gaddy again, Environmental Justice Organizer, Clean Water Action. And I just want to reiterate, Nikki just said what I was going to say. Clearly, the intent of the bill was to support the comparison with the non-EJ communities only. We don't want to just have you comparing the overburdened communities because we know what the result will be and you won't get the proper findings. So I'm not going to waste any more of your time because we will submit that in writing, but clearly we need to make sure that we support the comparison with the non-EJ communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim.
This is Ben Sirocco, Camden, New Jersey. I'll just be the third person. I was going to say, please remove the overburdened communities from the comparison. One quick example I can use of how this is hurtful when trying to make or unhelpful when trying to make this public health decisions. The Robert Wood Johnson annual healthy county rankings typically come out, and Camden is frequently listed as one of the unhealthiest counties in the state for a number of indicators. But if you actually look at the drill down into that data, you'll see that Camden City really is what pulls down the rankings for the entire county. If you're able to actually take out Camden City outside of the wealthier suburbs, you just see how drastically worse it actually is. So just to take that, I think it's good to sort of take out these outliers out of the data to be able to make better decisions.
No, yes, I agree with that. We've seen that data. We definitely understand that issue.
Thank you, Ben. Just for time's sake, we're going to move on to the next question.
I've now muted myself. Okay, so I think this is the last real substantive topic, and we'll talk a little bit about process going forward after this. But so for our permanent application evaluation, Section A of the bill states that DEP shall consider conditions to avoid or reduce the adverse environmental or public health stressors affecting an overburdened community. Let's go to the next slide. So when we look at that, we need some feedback on how we should go about considering what those conditions should be or could be. And some of the sub questions here. Before I go to that, I just want to make clear the intent of these questions. And when we talk about methods to reduce stressors and the relevant weight of different stressors in the community, we're not talking about methods that are of an unrelated nature outside of the community. So we're not asking these questions to attempt to create some sort of analogous structure to a wetlands mitigation, for example, where an applicant for a wetlands permit could avoid a certain amount of wetlands disturbance, and that disturbance could be mitigated by purchasing credits somewhere else, somewhere in the same watershed, but some different part of the state. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about practical measures on site or in the community that address impacts. And we will stand by the proposition that you cannot bank justice, and we will not be moving forward in that regard at all. But we do need feedback on what folks think could be, within those boundaries, what could be legitimate ways to go about reducing stressors. And part of those sub questions that we need to ask in that vein is whether the reduction of a different stressor could ever be acceptable. Should that analysis consider environmental benefits that might be lacking, like folks have brought up the access to green space. So one example, and this is just for conversation purposes, could the addition of green space be an appropriate way to avoid or reduce a stressor like noise? Is that appropriate? Or a mobile source of pollution, something along those lines. And then finally, what other considerations should we take into account on this issue? And I'm very hopeful we will get robust feedback on this topic.
Okay, Dave Pringle, the floor is yours.
Hi, can you hear me?
You certainly can. My only
All right,
question is what
great.
took so long?
All right. Well, it's important for other voices to be heard. On this particular point, I'm troubled that we're even raising the issue of avoiding. That's in section 4A, which is about an environmental justice impact statement. It has nothing to do with DEP's decision-making under 4C. The purposes of avoid in that section is for the applicant to do an analysis of, if we increase pollution in the neighborhood, what's going to happen, and are there some things we can do to mitigate it? That's very, very, very different than the heart of this bill, which is giving DEP the authority to deny or condition permits to not just not make things worse in EJ communities, but to make them better. We all love green space, and green space is great. But this bill is about a history of industry killing people. And I want a slide in a park, and I want a tree in a park. But before I want them, I want polluters held accountable, and I want pollution reduced. This bill, and I call it an EJ bill too, but it really isn't an EJ bill. It's really a let's not make environmental injustice worse bill. And I will make one final point here. I'm troubled by the suggestion that it's even a question of balance or taking sides. DEP is supposed to take sides. You are the Department of Environmental Protection. You are not the Department of balancing environmental protection and pollution interests. And I know that's not DEP's intent, and I know I'm being too harsh because we wouldn't be here today if it weren't for your awesome leadership in the last 2 years to get us to the point where we have the strongest environmental justice law in the country. But we all know there were massive compromises made in this bill. So please be careful with your words and do rigorous implementation of this law.
Thank you, Dave.
Thank you, Dave. Kimmy Way, I see you raised your hand again. Let's give this another shot.
Okay, you can hear me, right? Sorry about that. So, I think that when you're looking at neighborhoods or like affected communities, you have to look at the smallest land tracts possible, okay? And there has to be an awareness that there may be pockets of environmental justice communities contained within larger communities, but the laws that protect those residents should be extended to all the residents that are being affected, and not just residents that are where there's like a critical mass of EJ affected residents, but every resident that is affected. So additionally, I think that, like we have traditionally in the United States applied the idea that development is everything, and that land is there to be developed by somebody. But there isn't an awareness, hasn't been an awareness that a community belongs to its residents. A community is not just a place where there's land, and that land can have these people on it or those people on it or the other people on it. People can be moved out, they can be marginalized, they can be, subject to such dangers that they die. I think this law is going in that direction of establishing the rights of people in their communities. And I think that, that should just be a pervasive idea that grows and grows. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm glad we actually heard you this time. Thank you. Next is Natalie Agosto Filion. I hope I did better that time.
Hi there. Thanks for that. It's you got it. You're good with the pronunciation. Appreciate it. I wanted to flag because I haven't seen it named yet here. But you know, the ability for a community to sort of self-determine the solutions, it has to be part of this process. And I think to the question about participation that came up earlier and how it compares to this idea of having folks locally determine what is an acceptable solution. I think if the department is able to, let's say, trains folks in a participation process, or at least sort of provide the information in a way that is accessible. And I'm surprised it hasn't been said yet, compensate people for their time, for those folks who do not have day jobs that are dedicated to this topic, like many of us on this call. So I want to name that as a way of sort of answering many of these questions. I know that it further complicates the process, but I think these are complex issues. They're hyper local in terms of the impacts, and I think the solutions have to be in the voices and made by the impacted stakeholders. And to that end, the last thing that I'll share again, and I don't know if it'll come up in any additional questions, but the environmental stressor that is climate impacts, I think needs to be taken into consideration depending on the location of the facility in question. If it is at risk of flooding because of heavy precipitation events, because of tidally influenced storm surge events, because of sea level rise, these things need to be part of how we consider the problem of, for example, contamination or toxins that are being stored in a given facility. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalie. And next is Arnold Cohen. Arnold, you're self-muted. We heard you for a moment and then you went back out.
Using his laptop. That's why you probably see Arnold Cohen there. I wanted to make sure that we talked about heat as one of the stressors, the heat island effect that is on these communities. I live in the Ironbound, and that a lot of that comes from lack of overhead trees. And I think it would be really good if we could figure out some of the ways to mitigate that. The heat is terrible, and it makes it hard for people to breathe. That's it. I just didn't see it in the mix yet, so that's one thing I wanted to add.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, Ana Baptista, the floor is yours again.
I apologize. I didn't mean to get in the queue, so I'll cede the floor.
Okay, we have a new hand now anyway, and that is Melissa Miles.
Melissa, hi, can you hear me?
Now we can.
Okay, good evening. Thank you all. On this point, I don't feel, I feel that when you ask about reduction of stressors, to me, this sounds more appropriate for, facilities that are already in place, right? So what comes to mind is something like, a scrap metal facility sited on a block that is residential, and we know that there are tractors and cars and trucks and people coming and going. When they're up for re-permit, it seems totally acceptable that there should be reduction in stressors in order for them to receive any kind of renewal. But for new facilities, this seems like a way, kind of a way to condition a permit on a new facility, right? So I wouldn't think that it would be appropriate to leverage the pollution or the stressor from one facility in order to reduce or have some sort of benefit somewhere else, even within the same community. To me, it seems most appropriate that a facility that has some sort of stressor that we deem as going to increase the overall burden in a community, that that particular stressor would be the one that is reduced or eliminated, not something else somewhere else. So, this seems like something that would be more appropriate, for a renewal, much more appropriate for a renewal than a new permit.
Thank you. And it is absolutely relevant to the renewals and expansions, because that is what the legislation gives us the authority to do. We asked it broadly because we felt it could potentially be relevant to both, but your comments are well taken. Thank you.
Thank you, Melissa. And Melissa, I will note, is the Executive Director of the New Jersey Environmental Justice Alliance, for those of you who don't know her. Next is Meredith Taylor. And Meredith, if you can introduce yourself, your affiliation to everyone, your multiple affiliations.
Hi, I am a research associate at Rutgers University, but I'm also a member of EJAC and on the land working group and the chair of the Environmental Education and Communications Committee. I have been listening to a lot of comments tonight, and this initially wasn't clear to me till you guys went through the slideshow and kind of talked about the fact that this EJ bill really couldn't be used to deny a permit for renewal or for expansion. And so part of what's making me think, and I apologize about raising this issue if it's not the appropriate forum, but I sense that maybe one of the things that could be missing from a larger conversation is what happens to the families that after a while decide that the cumulative impacts of being around all of this stuff is sort of too much, and they would potentially like to move on someplace else. It occurs to me that the citing of all of these things drives down property values and erodes equity that many working families have really struggled to build. And so what options could there be as part of a larger EJ framework in providing either rental assistance to people who, once they've participated in the process and they've decided maybe they lose a battle or some facility gets a permit and folks say, look, I've already got 2 kids with asthma, I don't want them to get any sicker, I need to move on. There has not been enough conversation as part of a larger framework for how we provide monetary ways of making these families whole in the same way that was done to families after Hurricane Sandy, where they relinquished property and got fair market value to give up homes along areas that were seen as perpetual flooding. So I know it's not an totally analogous situation, but I am concerned about leaving people trapped in places that they can't get out of simply because they're surrounded by industrial development and they have no equity to leave, and then they're sort of stuck there.
Thank you, Meredith. So we're going to move on to the next question at this time.
There I go. Thank you, Olivia. So I think this is the last of the questions related to the bill. This deals with the definition of compelling public interest. So the bill provides that even where there is a finding of disproportionate impact, the applicant may still be granted a permit for a new facility if it will serve a compelling public interest in the community where it is to be located. So what we would like to understand from folks is and get opinions on what factors should we consider in determining whether the facility will serve a compelling public interest in the community, and then what type of factors should we consider to protect health upon the finding of a compelling public interest, and what things do you think would be relevant to that finding, and any suggestions on the process for determining that as well in terms of getting feedback from the appropriate groups or individuals within the community would be beneficial as part of this as well.
Okay, we will start with Toby Hanna, then Cheryl Snyder, and then Chief Mann. Toby, yourself muted.
Hi, Olivia, I'm here. I don't think I had my hand up, though. I had it up several questions ago, but I don't want to make you go back.
Okay. If you want to submit a survey, just make sure you fill out a survey. And that certainly works for us.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Next would be Cheryl Snyder. Cheryl, you're muted. Yeah, the organizer has unmuted you, so try again. Okay, Cheryl, we'll come back to you. Chief Mann.
Hi, thank you. I think that, one way to look at this is that public health should be the #1 priority of the DEP, as well as the environment. And putting the humans first, the people first, should be of the utmost public interest. That should be the compelling public interest, right? Is the protection of our natural world and the humans. And when the DEP or any other entity chooses to find a balance between the two, even though I do understand how businesses work, it appears to me that, like that last question there should actually be inverted. And, if the DEP has a compelling public interest permit, then what we need to be doing at that point is to be looking at what the public health risk would be. And it's not that these communities or any communities, whether it's my community or whether it's the Ironbound or whether it's Garfield or any of those other communities, there shouldn't be a choice between, their health and a facility, whether it's being expanded, whether it's a new facility like we're looking at in with this compressor station that sits above the Wanakee Reservoir, which feeds 4 to 6 million people with drinking water. So I think that you might want to consider actually turning that around. You know, is it in the best public interest in the word of health to allow that permit to go forward? Each life matters. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Man. Next is Greg Rameau. Greg, please introduce yourself with your affiliation.
Greg, I think you might be muted.
Greg, our organizer, has noted that you are in fact self-muted. Okay, Cheryl Snyder, if you're there, we'll try you again as well. Cheryl, are you there? Okay, I'm just going to give this a few more seconds because it doesn't appear there are any new hands raised. So we'll give you all a moment to ruminate on this. A few more seconds. Okay, I see there is a Renee Pollard. Renee Pollard.
Having this forum, this setting for the public. Let me introduce myself. I am the chair for the Sierra Club Environmental Social Justice Committee. And just to add to what Chief Mann said, I just want to say that public health should be at the forefront in evaluating the exposure to public or the community, and what will the impacts be to the community and the surrounding environment. That should always, I would think, be a consideration when you're doing an evaluating process. Thank you.
Thank you, Renee. Next, we have Amy Goldsmith.
Yes, hi, Amy Goldsmith, New Jersey State Director for Clean Water Action. I think I know this is kind of challenging for you guys, but I think the reality is that if we're looking at a compelling public interest in the community, there is no compelling public interest to put a huge polluting facility in an overburdened community. There is no value to putting another incinerator. There's no value to putting in another gas plant. There's no value in putting in another metal crusher in a community that's already overburdened. So I think that the compelling public interest in the community should be to not build it.
Thank you, Amy. Greg Rameau, it looks like your hand is up again. We'll give this another try.
Oh, this is Chief Man. Hi, this is Chief Man. I just wanted to reiterate that. So we are a EJ community that's living in a federal Superfund site, and there is the potential that there's going to be a recycling center put into that community again. And so this is a real life scenario that's playing out in front of us. And what would the DEP do to make the decision of whether or not that recycling center in an EJ community that's still a federal Superfund site be a compelling public interest. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to move on in our agenda now.
Thank you. Sorry, I think our muter got to me. My apologies for the delay. I think this is kind of an area for a little bit of constructive criticism and some feedback on tonight. The next two, I think this slide is just intended to, to get some reactions about, what we could do differently, what we could do a little bit better. As far as going through these types of formal stakeholder meetings, I think as Olivia has already talked about, we intend to put out a survey. We intend to accept written comments. I think to the extent that we can moving forward, we will try to make topics available to folks in advance so that you can be prepared for the topics of discussion. But if anybody has input on how we could do a better job, we are here to listen to that. So please tell us. And I think we should click to the next slide as well, which is just, is there additional information that you could receive from us that would help the engagement on this topic? So, on either of those, with the few minutes we do have left, we'd like to hear from you.
Okay, we have a lot of hands on this question, so please bear with me. Kurt Latuma.
All right. Can you hear me? All right. So I'm from the East Trenton Collaborative. The neighborhood that I work in experiences a lot of these issues due to the legacy of past industrial industries. So one thing I would say is, if possible, I know it's more difficult now, but take these kind of engagement activities to the communities. I know there's a lot of representatives here from different community-based organizations across the state. And I know we'd be happy to host like a virtual session about the legislation, because I think it's great that we're all learning about it, but some people did mention there's a lot of communities that might not have the awareness of the bill, of what the steps are or what the steps are going to be. So I think that piece of outreach and engagement would be very helpful.
Absolutely. I will, if anyone wishes to invite me to talk to their groups, I will make myself available on this topic. Absolutely. And I'm sure Olivia would be thrilled to join me.
I'm going to call on Marcus Sibley again.
Thank you again. And just to point out one more time, our committee, I'm the chair of the New Jersey State Conference NAACP Environmental and Climate Justice Committee, and we will be more than willing to help get the information out to our 41 branches across the state. I think it's very important. I think it's very important that all the groups try to pitch in and do their best to get the word out to the community so people know what's going on. But just 2 quick points. First, one thing I would say, you have a lot of volunteer groups that's going to do their best, but I think funds should be set aside to hire people, to the same way you have census workers out. I think this is that important that it should be door to door or email or phone banking. I think people, and I'm not saying the organization, but it's a lot of people unemployed right now. Just anybody have jobs to make the calls, make the texts, make sure the community is aware of what's coming. That's the first point. The second point is, I think what would give the outreach more weight is if people could have more faith in the process, because what we've seen over and over and over again are the polluters just make a financial calculation. Like they know whatever the fine is going to be, they can cover it. So I think what the public needs in order to get more interested in even sharing information, they need to know that it's going to be penalties to the polluters that are actually going to make them change. A lot of these polluters are already getting energy credits they don't deserve, but it's like they make a financial calculation and they don't care about the people in these communities. As many people pointed out, these are already communities that have multiple sources of pollution. Generations have been impacted by these, by the particulate matter, changing lives, changing trajectory. We know this. This isn't a secret. So I guess it's just a plea to the DP to, I don't know if it's more money. I don't know what that is, but I think it just needs to be stricter. It needs to be harsher. It needs to be something that can change the behavior of the companies, because when it comes down between caring about people and paying a fine, they'll pay the fine every day. And I think as more people know that there will be real consequences, they won't have a problem going the extra mile, making sure that their neighbors know that something is coming to town, because they know once I tell you about it, once we get out and speak on it, then something can happen and something can change. But there's just a lot of people feel like there's no change at this point, and that they're just going to keep getting run over. And that's why we need the DEP. We appreciate these type of forums, but we need the DEP to flex that muscle so that these polluters know, in addition to the bill, it's going to be additional penalties. Thank you guys again, and we really appreciate you giving us this forum. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much. So I'm going to take one more person, and it's going to be Kim Gaddy, because what I want us to be mindful of is that there is a presidential debate this evening, and I'm sure you all need a bathroom break and a chance to inhale and exhale before we move on to that next thing, to be good citizens. And I'm trying to give Kim some time to think about it, considering that she's the last person to speak today, so she can make it good and send us all home strong.
Well,
So
you
Kim,
know what? I would like to step back, and I know Maria from Ironbound Community Corp. Go ahead, Maria, take us home, because Marcus said all I wanted to say, and I thank you, Marcus. Let's go, Maria.
okay, Maria, it's yours.
Wow, thank you, Kim. It's such an honor. And honestly, Olivia and Sean, you've done a wonderful job tonight of the way that you've hosted us and the way that you've really allowed for dialogue and hearing from the community. So I think that as the DEP continues to show actually how other departments in the state of New Jersey should do community engagement. But I wholeheartedly agree with Marcus and Kim Gaddy that the way that we're going to increase outreach and engagement is by restoring faith in the DEP. And restoring faith, I want to go back to the last slide, means that you don't sacrifice environmental justice communities for the greater good no more. The bill says shall deny permits. Okay, so Sean, I heard some slippage there with conditioning permits to apply to both. It only needs to apply to renewals. And we need to deny, because the bill says shall deny permits in EJ communities, so that then we can protect the whole heart of DEP, protect environmental justice communities, protect the environment, and protect people who have been sacrificed for the greater good. So let's come back to community. I think y'all took a beautiful first step today in restoring faith in that system. And it's a long way to go. So I look forward to walking on this journey with you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Maria.
Thank you so much, Maria. That was worthy to be the last comment. So thank you.
So let's close it out. Let's just talk. We'll just kind of recap on our next steps. I think the last slide has an email address that will be relevant to people. So maybe we just want to go there and leave that up on the screen for a second. So, so we'll continue to gather input. We'll be accepting written comments, and as we indicated earlier, there's no hard deadline, but sometime in the next 30 days would make some sense to help us be informed as we start to engage in the development of potential policy decisions. And we'll also be distributing a survey that will track up many of the questions that we asked tonight. We may change some of our wording and some of our focus based on some of the feedback that we received today to make sure that we are getting the most accurate and useful information possible. As I indicated earlier, you should definitely expect further outreach from us on follow-up meetings once we digest the wealth of valuable information that you provided for us here today, and we begin to formulate some of these critical policy decisions. And then, just finally, since I get to say the last thing I'm going to say, I just really want to thank everyone on behalf of the department, on behalf of the folks on our EJ team who you didn't see today, who are working really, really hard behind the scenes to listen, to take notes, to catalog all of the questions that were raised in the chat, and will be your advocates to move this forward. I just really want to thank everyone for their time, for their commitment, and for their involvement on this issue. I think, as I said earlier, me personally and the department, we are fortunate to be in a position to implement this bill, and we are even more fortunate to be working with all of you. So again, and lastly, I would just like to say thank you, and I will leave the floor to our Deputy Commissioner for the last word.
Oh, that was perfect. I want to thank my co-facilitator here, Sean Moriarty. And I also want to just thank everyone who has spent the time to be on the call with us this evening. And I definitely want to recognize those who are behind the scenes who work for the DEP who are on this call. So I'm putting you on the spot. If you are able, please do turn on your webcam so everyone can see that you are here. And we thank you for your many contributions. And so I want everyone to see some of their faces too, because as we advance with the rulemaking, I want you to see the names and the faces that will continue to be a part of this process. And so the network of those who are supporting this effort go far beyond who you see here, but as a department, we are deeply committed to the process, and even more so to continuing to do what's necessary to build trust. So thank you all so much, and we will be in touch with you soon. Have a great evening.
Thank you, everyone.